Hello everyone, my name is Justin, aka Ghost Reader, and today I am going to be doing a video about the books about history that I have on my shelf that I have not yet read. So I haven't even opened them yet, so I haven't opened them yet and need to get to. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first one is a biography of the continent of Africa by John Reader. That's exactly what this book is. It's basically a big, giant survey overview of African history up to the present. And I bought this to kind of understand the continent a bit more. And hopefully one day I'll actually get around to actually reading it. It's quite a big book. It's about, it's not that bad. It's about 600 pages, but the print's really small. So definitely gonna have to dig into this book one day. Next is a book that I've had on my shelf for, I think, since high school. And I'm actually going to read it later this year. And that is The Question of Afro-Mestizo Culture, Puerto Rico, the Four-Story Country by Jose Luis Gonzalez. And basically this talks about the mixed heritage of the Puerto Ricans, Spanish, the Native Americans there, and the African American slaves that were brought to the country. So that basically is the exploration of the culture in Puerto Rico. So I'm definitely going to be checking this out for sure later this year, probably for Hispanic Heritage Month. Next is a book that I borrowed from a friend, and that is An Epic History from Homer to Hadrian, The Classical World by Robin Lane Fox. So basically this is a history of basic the Greek and Roman world. I don't think it includes anything other than that. So this is very Pacific, which I think they should have included more in it since it is about the classical world. But the focus of this book is generally, I think, from the early days of the Greek to about I think Hadrian was at 100, maybe like the first century AD. So basically that is what this book covers. Next is a book that I picked up earlier this year, thanks to A.G. McDonald, for one of his tags, and that is Songarath, The Peloponnesian War Begins by J.E. Linden. And this basically talks about the Peloponnesian War, which was a war between Athens and her ally cities and Sparta and her ally cities. So I actually want to read the history of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides first before I get into this. So actually I have the audiobook of the Peloponnesian War on script, so I already have that there. So whenever I read that, then I'll come back and once I read the original history by Thucydides, I'll come back and read this analysis of that time period. Next is a book that I kind of read in just for school, just selections for, but haven't really read it, and that is the Central Federalist Papers, the Central Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers. And basically this is a collection of basic arguments that people were putting forward in the early days of the American Republic as to how America should be run. Should it be like a strong federal government, a strong central government, or should it be more like power for the states and a weaker central government? So we went with a stronger federal government, but there was some argument back and forth about which one was the best form of government. And this collects a series of articles and essays written by some of the founding fathers and other influential writers and thinkers of the time period in America, trying to figure out which was the best one for Americans going forward. For the United States going forward. So definitely wanted to read this one day, especially since I paid for it, because I rented this and then actually paid for it. So I definitely have to get to this one day. Next is a book that I picked up from the Strand. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to actually read this particular version of it because it has a smell to it, unfortunately. But it is actually the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle, and it has illustrations in it by Bernard Lamotte. And this is basically I think this was written in the 1800s. And so this is actually a history of the French Revolution not too far removed from when it actually happened. So I don't think I'm going to read this copy though, because it has wet basement smell to it. But definitely have this on my shelf, and at some point we'll definitely read maybe a different copy of it. So the next book, actually technically I'm not sure I wound up in this pile. It's actually a book I actually did start reading, but it's been so long, pretty much gonna have to start over. So that is the Black Flags, The Rise of ISIS by Joby Warwick, and this basically talks about the many small choices that was made by people that led to the coming, the like the big rise of ISIS, from like the Jordan letting the guy out who started ISIS, letting him out of prison without really knowing who they were letting out, to like all other types of policy issues that and decisions that were made that kind of led to the rise of ISIS. And this was I remember pretty good, but I didn't finish it. So, but it's been so long, I'm basically gonna have to start all over. So yeah, so this is definitely it was interesting when I read it. So definitely will read this at some point. I'm not sure when though, because I have like so much other stuff in my TBR. So next is The Age of Revolution by Eric Hobsbawm, from 1798 to 1848. And so basically this covers the French Revolution and then kind of what was going on in Europe up until the revolutions of 1848, where a lot of liberal governments basically rose and fell, but kind of left a legacy of liberalism in Europe, in the latter half of Europe. So this was great. When I bought this, I was learning about the revolutions of 1848 and from a podcast I was listening to. So I picked it up from the Strand when I was there. And so yeah, so this would be a really interesting book on this interesting period in European history. Next is the next two books I actually bought at a library sale for like really cheap. I think they were like maybe around $2. And this is the War of the World by Niall Ferguson, 20th Century Conflict and the Descent of the West. And this basically covers World War I and II as if they were one continuous conflict. I'm actually reading another book by Niall Ferguson, which is the history of the Rothschilds from like 1789 to 1848, if I'm not mistaken, or 1849, something like that. But so yeah, so basically this covers it as one long conflict and talks about its impact on the world and on Europe and things like that. And the second book that I picked up at that sale was Rising 44, The Battle of Warsaw, by Norman Davies. And so this basically talks about the uprising in Warsaw in 1944 by the Polish underground and I believe the Jews in the ghetto too. As what happened was the Russians had made it, I think they were across the river, if I'm not mistaken, from Warsaw, or they were on their way, and the Polish people in Warsaw thought, well, if we can rebel against the Germans, we can help the Russians out and free our city. The Russians stopped and did not advance, and so this uprising was put down, unfortunately, for the Polish, but they fought really hard and really well to push the Germans out from the city of Warsaw at that time. So that is a chronicle of that. And my next two books are actually recent pickups. You've probably seen them in other videos, I think. I've really shown this one, which is the Pentagon Papers, The Secret History of the Vietnam War. And this basically is a series of articles, I think mostly the New York Times, but probably like from some other newspapers too, where they basically exposed some of the stuff that was going on in the Pentagon about decisions that were made during the Vietnam War. And so they basically exposed how a lot of people knew that we couldn't win in Vietnam, but yet we kept escalating the number of troops we were sending there. So that is what this book is about, and it's basically, that's published by New York Times. And basically this book is basically about those articles, the articles themselves in print here in one location. And last but not least, this book is called America's War for the Greater Middle East, A Military History by Andrew J. Bakshevich. And basically this book covers America's involvement in the Middle East and why we're there and the history of the conflicts and our involvement in the Middle East. And so, yeah. So that's it for this video. Those are all the books I have on my shelf that actually talk about history that I haven't yet gotten to. Well, there is that one that I have kind of read in, but most of them are on my shelf here that I haven't gotten to. Some of them I have some more on my Kindle and a lot more on my Audible playlist, but we're not going to talk about those since they're not physically on my shelf. So if you liked any of the books here, if you read any books, let me know down in the comment section below. You can like this video. If you like this video, like the video. If you want to see more videos from me, please subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at GhostFreeze28, and also you can find my link to Goodreads down in the description box below. So as always, keep reading.